Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin. I've been playing live hardware techno music since 2021 as Astro Palace. When I was looking for my next visual upgrade, I was really looking at all the different hardware visual options in 2023, and I decided on the Sleepy Circuits Hypno, and I couldn't be happier. It has a very easy to use interface combined with a very deep operating system. It's able to be used as a kind of set it and forget it device with the ability to save and recall patches. And it's also just really small and really fun to jam on. So while I was making a hardware techno setup guide for my overall gear, I really wanted to make a video just focusing on this guy because it is my absolute favorite piece in my setup. And it really shows off the vibe visually that I'm going for auditorily, if that makes sense. Okay, there we go. And lastly, I want to say this is not an ad. I didn't get paid to do this. I just absolutely love this product and wanted to show how I personally use this. There are other videos out there that show more of the features, but I just wanted to show how I integrate it into my own setup. All right, so let's go ahead and go over a few of the features that you may or may not already know about. The Hypno is a video synthesizer that has two different oscillators that can output a variety of shapes. You can also change it to input an image or a webcam video stream, which is really fun. You can also use these two different oscillators to modulate each other. There's a number of different feedback modes, and you can also use the feedback to modulate the oscillators. Can get really in-depth really fast for some crazy visuals. There are a number of modulation options, including rotation, fractals, drifts, polarization. You know, there's a bunch of things, and I would highly suggest watching some other YouTube videos that kind of go into the details of each of these. Now, on the bottom of the unit are several CV patch points that allow you to manipulate these in real time with your gear, and that is going to be probably one of the main focuses of this video is how I personally use this functionality to show off the vibe that I'm going for very, very easily. In addition to manipulating the Hypno via CV, you can also control it via MIDI CC messages on the USB port on the back. Those are really the two main ways that I play with the Hypno, in addition to the fun knobs and sliders on the front. Now, let me go ahead and just give a quick rundown of how I integrate the Hypno into my setup and how I use it live. You can ignore everything on the left side of the screen because that is all the audio related stuff, but that comes important when talking about CV and MIDI signals. So the Hypno is just simply outputting an HDMI output into the video splitter, and then that video splitter simply is a 1 to 4 HDMI out, and one of the outputs goes to a display that is inside my flight case, and I usually have the other three going to a projector and two other televisions. One tip I want to share is that the Hypno always needs to be plugged into an HDMI output, and it will not power up properly if everything's not powered on. I would say 1 out of every 3 or 4 times when I boot up the Hypno in this way, it doesn't boot up properly, and I have to essentially unplug the Hypno and replug it back in, and then it works fine. Just be mindful that everything is connected properly, or else you're just going to get an error message. If you do get an error message, try to simplify your setup and have just an HDMI going directly into the display, and then test it out from there. Now, how I control the Hypno live is much more important than I would say just the video output, or at least it's the much more complicated one. So now, including every portion of my setup, you can see that the Akai Force is really the main brains of the operation, and it is sending out MIDI both in 5-pin, USB, as well as a CV signal. I have a single CV channel going from the Force into the Hypno that provides some LFOs, some kind of steps, ups and downs, you know, some flash every eighth note or every quarter note or once a beat or something, you know. And that's nice to be able to just send CV using that. The MIDI out of the Force gets adapted to the 5-pin with an adapter going into a 1 to 4 5-pin MIDI splitter. That gets converted back into USB, back into the Hypno. It's a little long in terms of a data chain, but it works fine. You just have to make sure that you're buying the right adapter online. Now, that allows me to control the Hypno via patch changes, CC messages, anything like that. I typically only use it for patches. I don't really do any CC messages because I don't want to overload my MIDI data chain, and I kind of explained that in my other video. Lastly, I don't just manipulate the Hypno via the Force, I also manipulate it via the Roland TR-8S. That has a trigger out, and it allows me to map the trigger to the kick or the snare or every 16th note or quarter note. And that is really nice to be able to get an instant kind of pulse changing on the Hypno that's always in real time. The last thing in terms of cabling that I have, besides power, of course, is the webcam. Now, I used to have a camera that would go from an HDMI into a converter into the Hypno, but by just having a cheap USB webcam, it also eliminates the need for one more power supply. That is really the only other additional input option. I could trade the video input for a flash drive full of images and full of videos, and I have done that in the past, but I am choosing to use a webcam just because I seem to have more flexibility with it live. If I want to display an image or anything, I'll point the webcam at a sticker or at something cool on the wall. It does allow me to kind of integrate better into the atmosphere if I'm showing something in real time rather than something pre-planned. All right, now that we've gone over how I integrate it into my setup, now I'm going to kind of go over how I actually play this thing live. So first, before I even played anything live, I just spent a lot of time playing with the Hypno. It's a lot of fun. First, learn what you like to do with it and how to manipulate it live. And once again, just go check out some other videos on how to do that. Secondly, start saving all of your patches. Now, all you have to do to save a patch is simply hold down a single note on MIDI channel 16, and it allows you to save a patch. There are two different types of patches that I like to save. First types of patches: video synth patches. These are patches that use both oscillators in a number of ways and output something trippy to the display. I love it. The next type of patch is what I like to call a camera feed image patch. And this is something that is designed to mainly show something somewhat more clear to the audience, such as a camera feed or an image without too much distortion. So typically for these types of patches, I have one oscillator turned off, and then the other one is just simply outputting something, and sometimes it's also being manipulated by the other oscillator, even though it is muted. The next thing you want to do is find out how you like to manipulate these patches live. There are some manipulations that just look really, really cool and easy to execute on the fly, such as adding an instant drift or changing the color or changing the shape. You want to be able to know how to manipulate something with somewhat dramatic results very quickly. And luckily, the Hypno is designed to be able to do that really fast. The next tip is that every 4 bars, I typically try to trigger some sort of change. Sometimes that change comes from the Force itself, where I will change from one video synth patch to another, or to a camera feed patch and vice versa. Sometimes it is simply hitting either the feedback button or the shape button to be able to change what's happening on the screen, or loading a patch that is somewhat static, and then after 4 bars, simply adding in a drift to it, so then it's, oh, I've got movement now for the next however long. Sometimes every 4 bars, if I can't figure out how to make a manipulation the way that I want to, I'll just implement a hand frequency oscillator and turn the knob myself, every, do a half a turn every beat or something. And the next tip is when triggering the Hypno via CV, there is a tiny bit of a delay when it comes to syncing up the video to the audio. Now, we're talking very subtle, maybe a 30-second note or so. But what I typically do on the TR-8S is put my triggers 1/16th note ahead of the beat, and it typically always lines up with great success. So I don't have any issues with that. Speaking of manipulating the Hypno via CV, my favorite things to manipulate it via CV are the feedback and the hue offset. The most annoying thing about the Hypno, and talk about something really small to complain about, would be the ability to manipulate both, but unfortunately they're mapped to the same CV input. I like to also mess with the rotation, usually on the snare, or, manipulate the drift of the manipulating oscillator. One fun thing to do with the feedback is set the feedback basically at 0 and then use the CV input to pulse the feedback, essentially creating a bright flash on the screen as well. Another tip that I want to give about the Hypno is that if you are using a flash drive with some type of image or video that you want to play, the frame rate drops on the overall output slightly. So I have resulted to not using a flash drive. If there's somebody out there who can tell me otherwise, I'd love to hear it. Also, when doing video input, there is a noticeable lag for the video input. We're talking over a second. So whatever you're filming, please just know that it's not going to happen in real time. But the cool thing is that all the manipulation and all the CV input does manipulate it in real time. So you'll still get the cool flashing colors and modulation to the beat. It's just the webcam input. That's another reason why I focus the input on something that doesn't necessarily move in real time, like a disco ball or a sticker or something like that. Well, that pretty much wraps it up. It's a pretty simple device, especially compared to all the other gizmos and gadgets out there in case you want to implement hardware visuals into your setup. There are a few things in the future I'm looking forward to using the Hypno for, but I can't imagine it getting any more complex than this setup right now. The next step is probably replacing the video splitter with a video mixer, such as the Roland VO2 or the Live Pro L1. And then kind of seeing where we go from there. All right, if you have any questions, hit me up on Instagram at Astro Palace. Thanks.